Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Connect Africa. Welcome to our daily session with Kwame Gonza here. Today, we are going to look at the election result of Rwanda, but in general, we try to understand or make sense, if that's the right word, of people like Paul Kagame, who are third termers and fourth termers in our continent, the heads of states. So thank you, Kwame, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mahlet, and greetings to everyone who's on the platform. Everyone, who's supporting us at Connect Africa, we really appreciate you. We are really glad you are with us. Yoruba land, child of God. Mohammed Musa, everyone, you guys, we appreciate you for being part of this platform, for being part of the channel. And we ask you to invite other people. As Mallet has mentioned, we are on a journey. This journey is journey of consciousness. Is the journey of consciousness, not only for the Africans on the continent, but also Africans on the diaspora. So that is the very reason why you should support this platform, because the foreigners are supporting their own platforms and are pumping huge amounts of money. Like we said, BBC and the British are pumping around 600 million pounds every year into the BBC, so that the BBC can be able to push out false information in the ears of Africans and in the minds of Africans. So what we are here actually is to deconstruct that narrative, that false narrative that is being pushed by the BBC and all these foreign, media platforms. So you can see we have a lot of work. We have huge amounts of work. So then that means that we need a lot of support from you guys so that we can be able to completely do this work in its entirety, because the people we are competing with are doing this 24/7. And mind you, for us, we are coming here for, a few hours, 1 hour, out of the 24 hours. So, it's a lot. We have a lot to do, and we need really, and every support we can get to be able to do this full time and dedicate a lot of time to it and support, support the research so that we can be able to deconstruct this, false narrative from outside. So, with that being said, I want once again to thank you. The topic we're going to talk about, of course, Mahlet has brought it out already. She has already introduced it. We want to talk about the elections in Rwanda. Of course, President Kagame is taking his fourth term, which he is expected to win. And actually, the preliminary results which have come out this morning have been showing that 79% of the votes have been counted and President Kagame is winning. So we want to look at, is there a reason for him to win in Rwanda? Is there people, some of you people who are on the platform here, our viewers, have you been to Rwanda before? So I've been to Rwanda myself, to Kigali, and I've interacted with some of the Rwandese people, and because they are our brothers because personally come from East Africa. So these are our brothers. We live with them, even in Uganda. We live with them. So they are up there in our villages. So Kagame himself grew up, from Uganda. Actually, he studied from Uganda, and he served in the Ugandan military and the intelligence. So these are brothers. Now we want to examine: is there a reason for the people of Rwanda to elect President Kagame consistently? And of course, how does the international space or the mainstream media look at it? All right, how does it look at it? Because of course, in the normal neoliberal sense, being a president with the 4 terms, is a problem for them. They say it is a problem to them. And of course, not just the presidents, the individual presidents, but also the you can look at the political parties. Also, they think that it is a problem, like the Chama of Chama Mapinduzi in Tanzania. They warned the leaders there that why do they have only one party which is winning the election? So so we will see this that is not just about individuals, but maybe there's some hidden agenda also on that side. But maybe other people have other, thoughts. Yeah, so we will look at it. That is why we are here for today. Thank you very much, Mahlet. Back to you.
Thank you, Kwame, for that. Now, without further ado, let's dive into it. So, Paul Kagame wins like a landslide, 99 with 99% vote. But did we expect any different vote? And why having an election and wasting money when we know even before election that he's gonna stay? He's there for another decade or more.
Yeah. Yes, of course, President Kagame has been criticized, especially by the Western media. Actually, they did not even start today to criticize him, but they started even when he wanted to take the third term. They were asking whether he's going to stand again for elections, especially when he's on international platforms or international fora. For example, the World Economic Forum, whatever it is, all these summits which take place, for example, the Europe Africa Summit, you can see that in the past, platforms like DW, France 24, they would request somebody to interview him, and when they interview him, you see they try to bring up this issue of staying in power, for so long. But we look at even the Western leaders, many of them stay in power for a very long time. Look at people like Angela Merkel of Germany. She stayed in power for a very, very long time, more than close to, I think it's close to 18 years. That is the period she was there, in power. And you look at other people like Benjamin Netanyahu, they can even go from being a prime minister and come back again, to being a prime minister. So you see that I think that this stigma of leaders overstaying in power is only carried by African leaders. But this does not justify, overstaying in power, especially if you are not doing anything in the in the presidency. We have seen a lot of presidents in power who are not doing a lot, of things for their country. They are not really doing anything important for their countries. You look at people like Paul Biya, who is very old and he can even barely walk. You cannot say that, okay, he is there in power, maybe he's fighting, for the interests of the people, for the improvement of the people, or maybe he has something that he's trying to finish, all right, before he leaves power, that he has to justify this. We can talk of an example is, we can talk of President Robert Mugabe, for example. He at least had something that he was justifying. He was saying that we have to fight the sanctions until I will not leave power until the sanctions are removed from my country, because the sanctions are illegal. And so you can see that for him, he had at least some justification. But when you go to people like Paul Biya of Cameroon, you can see that there's really no justification for him to stay in power. And also, this informs us that when the Western powers want someone to stay in a certain position as a president, they want him to stay as a president, that person stays as a president. So this issue of leaders staying in power, overstaying in power and taking on more terms, is not peculiar only to African presidents, but also crosses all the way to the Western part, as that one we have already seen that to the point that when they want a leader to stay, actually they support it. Like we are talking about Paul Biya in Cameroon. France is supporting him all the way out. They are giving him all the support that he needs, even to quell the resistances, the uprisings that have been happening in Cameroon, whereby we have the northern part of the country. Ambazonia wants to separate itself. And he has been using maximum force, and no one has been talking about it, even though Africans have been making a lot of noise that the Cameroonian people, the Ambazonian people, are being killed, on the international stage, whether it's at the international fora, nothing has been happening. Even at the United Nations, nothing happens. So no one says anything about it. When we go to countries like Ivory Coast, for example, Ouattara finished his 2 terms, and you know, France allowed him to take other terms. The United States never said anything. France never said anything. And actually, some people died there when they were protesting against him taking a third term. He changed the constitution. So what we are seeing is that this is not a one-way situation whereby it is one-sided, that Africans are the ones only who want to stay in power, but the West always wants, short termism. And then also, there's a situation where we have that some of these leaders who are overstaying in power, they are not contributing to the growth of the continent or the growth of the continent, but rather they are there to, as we say, to serve their own interest, and then the interests of the colonial countries like France and the United States. And we have seen this on numerous cases. Even Ali Bongo, who was ousted recently, but even the one who came in, of course, we are not very sure about his leanings, as it looks like he is leaning towards France also. So on the other hand, we have a situation whereby some of the leaders will stay over there in power, and they are trying to do something which you see that this is reasonable. Now we have people like President Museveni. All right, this is someone I really don't support that much, uh, due to the fact that he has a confusing ideology when it comes to Pan Africanism. But on the other hand, you find that Museveni, these days, these are his most productive years. These last years when he's very old, they are some of his most productive years that he has contributed anything to the country, how it is. And yet this man has been there for almost, now he's coming to 40 years. He's been there for 38 years. All right, he's coming to 39, 39 to 40. But you see that these are some of his most productive years. And when you look at the first years when he was there in power, like, he almost didn't contribute much to the country, because he did the privatization and selling off of the national assets, the assets which were accumulated by the previous governments, like the previous presidents like Amin, Obote. So President Seven came and sold off, like, the Uganda Commercial Bank, Uganda Airlines, all these assets which belonged to the state. He sold them off. So you can see that all these years he's been there, until maybe 1998, he was engaged in these neoliberal experiments from the World Bank and IMF. And later on is when he started resisting. All right. He started resisting these practices and advice from the World Bank, and then started contributing something to the country. And therefore, today you see that he has some strong Pan African sentiment, even though his Pan Africanism, of course, is questionable, since he really opposes people like Nkrumah, who is the father of Pan Africanism on the African continent. He says that he doesn't believe in a unified continent politically. That is Museveni. He has spoken this a couple of times, and yet he claims that he's a Pan-African. So he is confusing, around there. So what I want to bring out here is that these elements are not a one-dimensional, human beings, that maybe he lies there and then he is on this side. Even when Nkrumah was around, also had some level of contradictions, because some people were, asking Nkrumah, why is he taking some loans from, for example, from the International Monetary Fund? Why does he accept, yet he is fighting against imperialism and neocolonialism? So you can say that that is a contradiction in itself. All right, why does he take money from the capitalists if he's against capitalism? Because this was somebody who did not believe in capitalism. So that is a contradiction, right? So all these elements, they have, that contradiction. Now for Kagame, from my observation, I think that he has been, he has contributed a lot to the country. He came to power in 1994, and then he helped to stop the genocide, which was in Rwanda, and then he brought a lot of peace he organized the country, helped the country to organize itself. And so the people see him as the father of the country, like how you see, they used to see Lee Kuan Yew. Rwanda is one of the most disciplined countries, in the African continent and actually in the world. All right, very low levels of corruption in the country, extremely low, is almost non-existent. It's just that because it is an African country, that maybe they will say there's a lot of corruption, but the corruption is almost non-existent. In Rwanda, money is used very well. All right, public assets are used very well. So the country is very clean. So everything is organized. The cities are planned. All right. So everything is just organized. And then there's the rule of law. The laws, they work. So now when you go to places like Uganda, even though Uganda, there's a lot of freedom, but the freedom is chaotic. All right. It's almost like chaos. So I'm telling you this because that's where I come from. There's a lot of freedom, but it is chaotic. All right. So one time I went, I went back.
Freedom in what sense, Kwame? Just
So,
curious.
so people do whatever they want. That's the thing. All right. Like people do whatever they want to the point that they don't respect the law. Do you get the point? But in Rwanda, the law is respected. Everyone is watching their back to see whether they are doing the right thing because the law will catch them. All right. So it is strict. Even I think I saw a video of one African American who went to Rwanda, and he said that in Rwanda, if it feels like somebody is always watching you, okay, it doesn't feel like it is a free country, sort of like free country. You see, so that's what he said. But of course, in an orderly country which is trying to grow itself, because remember, Rwanda is just a few years old, all right? 1994, this is 30 years, right? 1994, 2000, about 20 years, right? About 20 years, 2024, I think about 30 years, right? Rwanda is, since when it came back to reorganize itself, that's about 30 years as a country, 2024. So you can see yourself that you need discipline, you need order for a country like that to organize itself. So I think that for President Kagame to get these 99 is not anything, but because he has contributed greatly, they see him as a father of the country. He has contributed to the growth of the country. It has been growing very well economically, even though, of course, in one way or the other, that growth may not be up to down, very much down, but at least the people, they see that this is somebody who has brought pride in them. Because if everywhere where you go, even on the African continent, people talk about Rwanda. That you look at what is happening in Rwanda. So I believe that these are some of the reasons why President Kagame has been able to hold on to power. But what I wanted to bring out in the introductory part is that this phenomenon of people overstaying in power is not like is unique to Africans, and it's not that is only the Africans who want it, but when the West wants it, it uses it. And even today, we have elements who are overstaying in power, like Ouattara, who changed the constitution, and we have elements like Paul Biya, who's very old and he can barely even walk or understand what he's doing. But these people are supported by the West. So all this confusion, which is looking like a confusion, some level of confusion, that we don't have uniformity across the African continent, it shows you that external people can do whatever they want in the continent because we don't have control over the continent. And therefore, it means that we need to reorganize ourselves as a continent so that we can have some sort of uniform measure of how we govern ourselves. And of course, that measure should be progressive, in that anyone who is in power should be accountable, all right? Should be accountable, should be able to deliver, so that we avoid then the external influence. But that external interference, we cannot avoid it if we don't unify the continent. That is another thing, because the interest of the external interference is premised on the resources which they want from the continent, but also thrives that interest thrives on our disorganization as a people, our refusal to unify as a continent. Then the manipulation becomes easy for them. So that's why you see that our situation looks chaotic on the continent. You have on one side, one leader is increasing his terms, and then he will also justify it. Like, for example, Biya can increase his terms and justify it that because Kagame has increased his term, right? But when you look, Kagame is contributing to his society and the people want him there. All right. So we have that scenario like that. But when you go to Biya, he has not contributed anything. You look at people like Ouattara in Ivory Coast, he's manipulating. For him, he's just manipulating, and France and the superpowers are helping him to manipulate. The colonial countries are helping him to manipulate.
But
Okay.
you, Kwame, do you believe for people like Paul Kagame, even if he contributed and is contributing, yes, he has changed the image of Rwanda from that genocide picture that we have in mind to something like when now Rwanda is called in our mind, it is the cleanest country, or Kigali is the cleanest city in the world, this and that, and they're very proud, as you said. But do you believe there should be a limit if countries are contributing to the development of their people and doing what is expected from them to do? Should we just let them be, or should we have a limit?
I think the question of limit is not written anywhere. So this should be from the people themselves of a given society, what they agree that it should be. I don't think it should be determined from anyone from outside. So I think what we should ask is what do the people of a given society want. All right. It is not written anywhere that it is a scripture, right? It's not scripture like in the Bible that you should have two terms, right? Okay, so one time, President Kagame was asked.
No, what do you mean? In constitution, most of them, they amend the
Yes,
constitution. They don't
yes,
start writing, oh, I will be here for 4 terms.
yes. But then even the constitution itself, when it is written, it provided for its amendment. You see the point? So if the constitution was like a holy book, then it would not be amended. But the constitution, when it is written, it provides for its amendment and how the amendment should be carried out and who should amend. You see the point? So these things are not like stationary, like they are static. They are not really completely static, that they are fixed in stone. The constitution itself is that the document is a document which serves the people. All right. So the people, when they agree that we should amend it, they amend it. It is not like a holy book, like a Quran, which it cannot be amended. That it was written, made by God, as other people believe that it was written by God. All right. Then it cannot be amended. You cannot amend the Quran because it was written by God, as some people believe. All right, as the Muslims believe. So I think that the question of how long a leader should be there should be determined by that particular society at a particular time, and it should not be answered by external interference or pressures or whatever it is. As long as that particular society has determined that this person is productive to this our society. You look at a society like, for example, Singapore, which of course many Africans compare themselves to, and they say, oh, in the 60s all the African countries were at the same stage with Singapore and South Korea and all these countries. But when you look at these countries, their leaders govern them like dictatorship. Like Lee Kuan Yew himself was like a dictator, like how you are seeing Kagame is behaving. Like everyone who opposed him, he would run the person out of the country in Singapore. And he governed like for 30 years. He ruled the country for more than 30 years. And then, of course, he took it from third world to first world. So you can see that there's no one single way of governing, oneself. So what we want to bring to the understanding of the Africans is that there's no one way. Don't let the neoliberal system, the Western system, confuse you and then plant it in your mind that there's only one way of governing yourself. There's no one way of governing yourself because they themselves don't believe in it, actually. They don't believe in it. That is why you see they come to our continent and all the other parts of the world, and they support dictators, and the dictators, they will be there in for 40 years, as long as those dictators are allowing the resources to flow from our countries to the Western world. They will do that. But on one side, they say we should have term limits. All right. Right now, France, like I said, is supporting Ouattara. Ouattara amended the constitution and stayed in office in Ivory Coast for a third term, and it was illegal. He was supposed to finish 2 terms and go. But France and the United States supported him. Why? They have military bases over there. And France sees Ivory Coast as a lifeline.
Yeah.
Okay, sees this economy as a lifeline because it is feeding on this. And its corporations have a lot of businesses over there in Ivory Coast. Now, there is a question which President Kagame also asked one time when he was in an interview. They asked him that, why do you want to stand for a third term? All right, that period he was going to stand for a third term. They were going to amend the constitution for him to stand for a third term. Now he asked that, so if you think that the somebody standing for a third term is very bad, why don't people like Obama or George Bush or whoever it is in the United States, why don't they stand for 1 term and go? If the solution is to have as little terms as possible, why in the United States, why are the leaders not standing for 1 term and go and leave? They should then stand for 1 term if this is the panacea to good governance. So then this also gives you something to think about, really. Because if you are saying that it is 2 terms, why not make it 1 term now? Let's make it 1 term so that we can have as many people to govern, because that is the argument. So who decides then that this is the magic number? Magic number is 2. Who decided that? Is it God? Okay, if it is not God and it is people who decided that, then people can decide also that it is 4, it is 3, or even can decide that it is 10. This is the magic number for us, because it depends, on a certain group of people in a society at a given moment in their history. Because look, the conditions of the West are not the same as ours. Our countries were plundered by the same people, you see, and they built their societies up. At the same time, the same people who did not build their societies with democracy are coming to tell us that we should build with democracy. You see, so it is difficult. So, but to avoid all this confusion, we have to unify the African continent and evolve our own political system as a continent. So that is when we'll be able to ward off external interference, and we as a people, we agree on how we are going to govern ourselves. We evolve our own political system, a political system that is not imposed from outside and even in certain cases forced on us, and also a political system that will not be manipulated by outside, so that they can create this confusion inside and outside. A political system that will not be manipulated by people we have not agreed on. So when we as African people evolve our own political system, which is different from the West, then we can agree and say, okay, let the person be there 2 terms, let it be 3 terms. Or even we can say that if we look at the key performance indicators and we see a leader is performing well on all key performance indicators which are set, then that person should be there as long as he's delivering. It could be 30 years, it could be 40 years. Or we can say that if the person is not delivering on the key performance indicators, if he was going to go for 4 years, if it's 2 years, the person should stop. There should be a provision, there should be a mechanism for blocking that person from continuing because he's not delivering on the key performance indicators. So, we could have something like that. So we could have a political system like that. But, it is an intricate, situation. It's a very, very, a complicated situation for now.
Another thing that I wanted to clarify is that when you say there was this African American that you heard him commenting after staying in Rwanda, that he felt like every time his back is watched. But I take that thing literally because I heard once, actually, it was a diaspora something. channel, TV channel in Ghana, and the lady is from Ghana actually, but she was in Rwanda, and she was arguing that in fact people are, it feels like in prison because everybody checks everybody, like this intelligence unit are
Yeah. Look,
everywhere.
look,
So
Mahlet,
is
like if
it
you're
really
coming,
the law, or
no,
is it
I
like
think that
way to
it comes
control?
from it comes from someone coming from a society which is like you are coming from a society like is disorder. If you're coming from the United States, you live in Chicago. People are shooting everywhere. Like if you go to Chicago, people are shooting up and down, killing, drive-by shooting. Even killing babies, killing elderly people on the streets. And you go to a society like which is organized like that. Definitely, you're gonna feel like you are being watched. You are going to, if you are coming from a society which is disorganized, completely disorganized, and you come to a society which is organized, like even if you are an African and you come from our societies and you go like to a country like Sweden, they don't litter everywhere. I mean, there's a way you watch yourself also. You see, so I went to Uganda, and there's this guy. I was in the taxi. I think he was not staying in the country, and he said that so he was complaining about the country. And he said that what is wrong with this country, Uganda? That everywhere the tomatoes, this one is selling tomatoes on the roadside, that this one the border, the Okada is passing, he will step into the tomatoes. That what is wrong with this country? There's no laws, the laws they don't work. So you can see that this person was dissatisfied with how the society is disorganized. So this is excess freedom. So for me, from my outlook, actually, I was having a conversation with one of my Rwandan brothers, and I told him that me, I don't like the freedom which Museveni brought to Uganda because it's unproductive. Because the people are poor, they are backward, and you give them freedom. So what freedom? What is it for? I mean, you need to organize the society. If you go to a city like Kampala, completely disorganized, is now that it's being organized right now. They are starting to organize it. But the city was completely disorganized. And you go to Kigali, like the city is organized, everything is organized. You know where to find the Okada, you know where to find everything is organized. All right. But you go to Kampala, things are just upside down. This one is pushing this side, this one is pushing the other side. This one is selling tomatoes where the vehicles are supposed to be passing, something like that. So you can see that if you come from a society which is like that, and you go to a society which is extremely organized like Rwanda, then you will feel like maybe there's something missing or somebody is watching me, because of what you are not used to. But if you are used to that society, then when you come to a disorganized society, then definitely you will feel like there's something again missing. Like this society, why are they disorganized like this? You see? And yet you can see that Uganda is to a certain extent richer than richer than Rwanda. You see? Because all the manufacturing, Rwanda gets a lot of its manufactured goods from Uganda. Because Uganda has a lot of manufacturing, a lot of industries. You see? So I mean, this one I can't say that it is because of that particular society, but it's because of the organization and where somebody is coming from. That's what I believe.
Now, as far as Rwanda is concerned, I mean, to some extent, I can understand why the Rwandese are all for Paul Kagame, because even if sometimes he talks about, Pan-Africanism when he's in some kind of continental conference or in the African Union, the guy is known to be as a nationalist. He's like Rwanda first.
Yes,
He's not really into unity.
yes,
But for us who are Africans, but not Rwandese, um, we find ourselves like, okay, you say when we hear this rhetoric speech about Pan-Africanism, you think he's a Pan-African, but sometimes you see him things, for all the things that now Rwanda is accused, together with Uganda when it comes to the supporting the M23 rebels in DRC, but also other things. So this kind of leaders who are playing with the emotion of the African people by bringing that Pan-Africanism rhetoric, what is your say on that? And where should we place them? I think for me, Museveni is also the same. Where should Museveni is okay? In fact, he's into unity, but you find him also sometimes collaborating with the West, or you get that sense. Not really find might not be the right word. So where should we place them, and how do we view them for better understanding?
So I was having a discussion with some of my Pan African comrades, and I was telling them that for the continent where it is, we need to do a correct analysis, because we, the Pan Africanists, are interested in unifying the continent. We have to do a correct analysis on all the leaders on the continent, and then that will inform us, will give us good information, on how to approach what we want to achieve on the continent, whether it is in the next 20 years or the next 30 years. Because if we miss that, then we're going to get, really big problems. So for people like President Seven, that one for him, he has like outright mentioned that he doesn't support, you know, Nkrumah's approach, and of course Muammar Gaddafi's approach. Muammar Gaddafi's approach. President Muammar Gaddafi was the same as Nkrumah's approach. The fact that we should unify the continent quickly. For President Kagame, I think that he wants to build Rwanda, sort of like Israel. How you see Israel, but the general Pan African sentiment of the East African region, they lean more towards Nyerere, but also they lean towards the old, President Nyerere, because remember that in 1963, Nyerere was arguing with Nkrumah, and Nyerere was part of the Monrovia group, and Nkrumah was part of the Casablanca group. Nyerere was arguing that we should go slow, right? We should go slow on integration of the continent. We should not go rapidly. Like Nkrumah was saying, we should unify the continent now and form a union government. As the same thing, even 2002, that Gaddafi was cornering the African heads of state in Isate in Libya and pushing them that they should form a unified military, to be able to protect the continent from imperialism. And of course, they refused. They failed, and including Seven also failed. So Nyerere was arguing from that point that we should go slow, unify the regional bodies. And when we unify the regional bodies, then we can go on to unify the greater continent when we have finished building our economic power in the regional, countries. So was sort of a loose approach. It's sort of a loose approach. And Nkrumah warned them and told them that this approach is not going to work, because imperialism is not going to wait for you to carry out all these plans that you are saying. And if we don't do it, that was in 1963 in Addis Ababa, the formation of Organization of African Unity, of course, which was a compromise. But in itself, the Organization of African Unity, if it was not in Nkrumah's push, even the Organization of African Unity would not have got it, because the people who wanted to delay the United Africa, they saw the formation of Organization of African Unity a loose organization which did not, have powers to enforce, whether it is laws, as we are seeing it even today, did not have power to enforce, whether it's security, apart from having an observer's, status. They saw this as a chance to ward off Nkrumah's, aggressive approach towards forming a union government. So Nyerere was on the side which was arguing for regionalism. But later on, President Nyerere would come to Accra in 1997 and give a speech. Now, he said that Nkrumah was right. Now, this period in 1997, Nyerere was no more a president. All right. So he said that Nkrumah was right. We should have unified the continent in 1963. But Nkrumah was no more. And he said also that that it took him 10 years of reading Nkrumah's work after Nkrumah died, because Nkrumah died in 1972. So after that, Nyerere said that he took, after 1972, when Nkrumah died, he took Nkrumah's books and started reading, but it took him 10 years for him to understand what Nkrumah was talking about. In the 60s, in the 1960s, 1963, Nkrumah was talking about futuristic things. So Nyerere had to study Nkrumah's work. Nyerere said that he had to study Nkrumah's work for 10 consecutive years consistently for him to understand what Nkrumah was talking about. So in 1997, he came to Accra and he gave a speech that Nkrumah was right. We should have unified the continent long ago, because if we don't unify, the Africans will not survive on this planet, because the people we are dealing with are very aggressive. He's talking about the Europeans, whether even the Chinese. All these people are very aggressive, towards when it comes to their interests, and they want to get their interests by all means necessary. All right, at your expense. So he said that if we want any life under the sun, then we have to think about unity. But we will not be able to solve any of our problems unless we unify. Because before, so he said that unity will not solve everything, all the problems which we have immediately. But before we unify, we will not even start solving those problems. So this is the statement he said. He said that unity will not solve all the problems which we have. But before we unify, we will not even start solving those problems which we have. And if we want any life existence under the sun, the only solution is unity. So that was Nyerere. Now that Nyerere, it looks like the Nyerere who had reached that level of 1997 in East Africa, it looks like they have not attained him. They are on the old Nyerere who was opposing Nkrumah. They have not reached, including Museveni himself, they have not reached the level of Nyerere of 1997. They are still on the old Nyerere. That's the one they are following. Yet in 1990, by 1997, Nyerere had reached the level of Nkrumah, of fighting for a union government, of saying we should fight for a union government now. So now this is where we have a problem, especially with the East African region, that
Well,
the
after
central.
60 years, our heads of states now they are more of nationalists instead of, okay, there were nationalist leaders, one who wanted also to unify the continent, but uh, they don't even think about region, let alone to unify the continent, not even regionalism. Everybody is in its own state, little
Yes.
sovereign state, and that's
Yes,
it.
I think that is simply because we have not gotten yet somebody who wants to take on that responsibility, like how Gaddafi took it, right? And
Mhm.
say, I'm gonna crusade around the continent and fight for the unification. All right. All of them, they fear imperialism. Okay. That one I think is the biggest problem which they fear. That if they try to push for a unified Africa, then they will be targets of imperialism. All right. I think that is also another problem. And of course, the other thing, which is selfishness, that one, it is there. Like having this narrow nationalism, which doesn't take the continent anywhere, concentrates only in small states. And yet, these small states, you cannot build a small island on a greater continent. All right. We have all these continents. We live on this continent. All of us is a huge land mass. You cannot build out one small island, which is rich, in the first world country, stuff like that, because it will be overrun. Okay. It will be overrun by the surrounding poor countries which are around. And we have seen this with South Africa. All right, we have seen this, and the reason people run to South Africa because they think that, okay, there's maybe some relief there, so all the other Africans run there, and and most of them who are there, they come from neighboring states, Malawi,
Mhm.
Zimbabwe, and all these East African countries, whether it's Tanzania, in Ethiopia, even some of them Eritrea, Somalia. So all of them, they come, right? So this is the example of what Nkrumah was talking about. So you have that selfishness that it holds back the continent, but you have also the fear of imperialism, or the imperialistic countries, because they still have an interest in the continent. So that becomes a problem also, that they fear, some of them fear to take a step, to take a stand, all right, that what will happen, maybe sanctions and stuff like that. So they don't want to take that step.
But do
So
you think do you think it's also the fear has to do here, because it is the same reason in 1963 that prevented the African Union or the Organization of African Unity to have the power that it has supposed to have by now, because countries wanted to stay in their little sovereign power and they didn't want to give up that one. And still the same reason is there again after some 65 years, still why the reason the AU did not have that power that it's supposed to have. So at that time in 1963, the imperialists did not have so much power on Africa, if compared to now. So do you think this reason still
I think
survive?
the imperialism itself, the selfishness is there, outright is there. I can tell you it is there. But that selfishness also is built on the interference of imperialism. All right. So that selfishness, they can be justified on that point which I made, that people fear. All right. Others, they hide behind fear to propagate their selfishness of keeping the continent divided, and they get support from the West. All right. You can see, like, for example, Angola came out of the OPEC countries. All right. It came out and it is no more part of oil producing, exporting countries. Why? Because it is being cajoled and is being manipulated by the United States. So that's simply like that. So this manipulation continues. Look at, for example, Zambia is being manipulated by the United States. Ghana, you see, that you find that these heads of state, instead of looking out for the interests of the continent, they move in a different direction. So this manipulation also continues, that manipulation, and they manipulate, of course, selfishness. They manipulate based on selfishness and say, "Oh, don't you want to stay in power forever?" You know, people like Ouattara in Ivory Coast, they will tell him, "Oh, don't you want to stay? We are going to support you." You see, and so they will manipulate. They will play on that selfishness. All right.
Yeah, but it has to do
So
also with our leaders, how they are
yes, of
okay.
course, of course, of course. So that's why I say that now, there has not been, ever since Gaddafi was there. Then they removed him, of course, but of course Gaddafi was doing the work of mobilizing the heads of state. A lot of them, he was mobilizing them to bring them together, and of course others were resisting. You know, like even like Botswana was resisting, Uganda was resisting. All these South Africans, some of them, they were laughing at him, including Zuma, Jacob Zuma of South Africa. You see, all these guys were laughing at him in certain cases, but he was there mobilizing. All right, he was mobilizing. Now, what we are missing today is that we don't have that person who has the ability of mobilizing the continent. So we are lacking, a head of state who is willing to step into that space, that vacuum, and then mobilize the other heads of state and show them how important unification is. So then this, it means that the African civil society then has to step in that gap and push very, very hard. There's supposed to be a lot of commitment, because if the heads of state are not appearing, then African civil society and Pan Africanists have to step into that space and push very hard.
And
So
I
that is what I
really
think
hope that what's
this is.
happening in Kenya will be, taken as a lesson by other countries or the people of other African countries. I think what Dejuma Butik has written here kind of sums it up, and I totally agree. He says imperialist tactics don't change, but we have leaders who do not read and are indifferent. They say in French, but indifference. Yeah, it's uh, that's one good thing about or you can call it arrogance about the West. They never change their tactic. It's always the same thing, same steps they follow when they want to throw down a government. But we just don't seem, we don't read, we don't make sense. Yeah, it's like we are sleeping, and we don't take measures. In any case, I mean, this can take us long. Um, let's go back to Rwanda. And how do you view the perception? Because the guys, I mean, most of us, including myself, is perceived he's a favorite guy of the West. However he talk and whatever rhetoric he has, those viral videos we see, how he reacts, how he responds to certain, foreign journalists being talking and pointing his finger against the West, but we all perceive him as his favored. What do you think of that? And relating it also how they reported this fourth term 99% win.
Yeah, so I think that people who perceive Kagame as a darling of the West, they are not mistaken. It has been like that, and it is simple. Is because if you want to take out the resources from the Democratic Republic of Congo, you need Rwanda and you need Uganda, because these are the neighboring countries which are neighboring Rwanda, I mean, are neighboring the Democratic Republic of Congo, all right, from the east. Especially those resources are coming from the eastern part, and that is the most unstable region where a lot of people are suffering. So you need these regions. In the past, you just needed, to go through the south when there was the apartheid regime in South Africa. You just needed this region where there was Ian Smith in Zimbabwe. You just go through Zimbabwe and go to South Africa and you take the resources. In the past, that is how it was. Now, because Zimbabwe is there, is strong and is resistant to imperialism, then you need these areas. So the West definitely needs him. You may find that they need him even more than he needs them, all right, to use that region. And even Kagame himself came out to speak about this issue when he said that people are talking about resources, but the resources in are coming to Rwanda. They are just going through. They are not staying in Rwanda. So people need to ask the questions: where are these resources coming and going to? Where are they going to? People should ask those questions. So he brought these statements. He said this in a speech in broad daylight. So, and then he added that if he stopped these resources from passing through Rwanda, then it would be a big problem. He said that would be a big problem. Now, what this points to, and of course, for the case of Uganda, also some resources also pass through Uganda, and then they go all the way to Dubai, some of them to the United States, Britain, and all these countries. They go all over there. Some of them, of course, to Beijing. Now, this is just a symptom of the weakness of the continent and the failure of the Africans to take control of our affairs. So if someone can manipulate this way, and these are the things which Nkrumah was fighting against, all right? So the fighting for independence was supposed to give us control over the continent back as Africans, and the solid control over this continent so that we can run it as we want it, whether it is industrialization process, whether it's building infrastructure. We were supposed to consolidate that ownership of the continent and control over the resources as Africans through a unified continent with a government which represents all of us. Now, when we refused to do that, then we left the doors open for manipulation. Okay, so these affairs in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they show the failure of us as Africans as a collective, and the external forces, they feed on that failure. All right, so this is not a Kagame issue, as many people want to suggest. Even if you remove the Kagame, or even if you arrest Rwanda and you removed it, the West would find still how to take the resources from the place. All right, so this is not a Kagame issue. So I would like to differ with the from other people who want to suggest that this is Kagame or Museveni issue. Even if you removed Museveni or you removed the Kagame, still the West would want to use anyone who will be there to take the resources. So then it goes back to us that we failed. We have failed to take care of our own affairs as a continent. All right. And then we have people separating themselves. I'm in Kenya, or I'm in Uganda, I'm in Ethiopia, I'm in Sudan. You see? So it shows our failure as a collective, that we have failed to focus on what is really important, and we are focusing on petty things which are really not important.
I was muted. So that's as far as how the relation between Rwanda and DRC is concerned, and how we perceive him and how many see him. That he is in fact a facilitator, or he's also using or looting with the West. That's a perception. But in terms of the Western media, how is? Did you access some of them?
I beg your pardon?
In terms of the international media reporting his win for the first time, did you assess what did they say? Some of them, like how did
Yeah,
they?
so I think that what for them they see it, they just see it as ridiculous that he wins by 99%. Of course, they will even be laughing about it. But I think that their assessment and their outlook, I think, is just ignorant. From my understanding, is to conclude that somebody must have maybe 60% before that election can be legitimate. I think it comes from ignorance and superiority complex, for you to think that you know a society better than another person who lives in that particular society and how they run that society. Is a claim uh, that you know everything, all right, and therefore have fixed. Like, it's the same thing which we have been talking about. Like, somebody thinks that they have fixed that it should be 2 terms, but then who determines that it should be 2 terms for a president? Who determines that? Who determined that in the very beginning? All right. So if it is human beings who determine that it should be 2 terms, then human beings can still agree that it should not be 2 terms. All right. So is it a uniform? Is it scripture that it should be 2 terms? So is the same thing, that societies evolve differently. All right. So if societies evolve differently, then certain things, certain characteristics can happen in particular societies, that you can have a leader who is supported by with 99%. All right. If you went to Singapore when Singapore was built and you cast it, you put up an election, you will see that people like Lee Kuan Yew would get 99% because of where he has brought his society from. All right. So I think that this idea that you cannot get 99% or you cannot get 80%, which is normally pushed by the West, I mean, is based on superiority complex and arrogance, to think that they know everything in society, that if you get 80% is possible, most possibly illegitimate, or if you get 90%, it's most possibly illegitimate, you have rigged the election, you have to get 60%. I think this is arrogant, is completely, arrogant, and not is complete nonsense.
Thank you very much, Kwame. I think that was it for us as far as this election of Rwanda concerned. But in general, how do we see these third termers and fourth termers in our continent? I thought I have seen a question, but it was related about Pan-Africanism. Is he Pan-African? In one word, if you have to answer, is Paul Kagame Pan-African?
So I don't know on what scale we can measure his Pan-Africanism. I don't know. You really, for me, it is confusing. I can't tell. I can't tell. because the presidents, I know that they are Pan-Africanists. They are those ones who have waged like a Pan-African struggle across the continent, and like they have waged a war for unification, for the unification of the continent. President, Kwame Nkrumah, and a few others who have really pushed for the unification of the continent, or have supported the unification of the continent outright. So those are the people, I can say that they are really Pan-Africanist. But is President Kagame a Pan-Africanist? I really can't tell that one.
Yeah, okay. No, it's clear. Thank you, Kwame. I'm just gonna check. Putin won by 80%. Russia loves him, and their economy is beating all odds. Yeah, I mean, if the people love that leader, I mean, let them be. We have kingdoms and queendoms in ancient time and in empires that have been there for hundreds of years. And but the thing is, if it doesn't work, if it's just against the will of the people, that's the thing. If it's a forced one, um, yeah. Otherwise, it's not that we are in support of this electoral democracy or something. We are just viewing it. I mean, if it works for the Rwandese people, yeah, and of course, it has to work also for the African people. We cannot separate that. Yeah. Uh, as an African citizen, we have to create criterion for how we measure a Pan-African. It's a good one, I think. Yeah, it's well said, Dejuma.
Maybe
This
the Pan-African, the coalition of
everywhere.
Pan-Africanists will come up with that.
Huh?
Maybe the coalition for Pan-Africanists will come up with that. Will come up with that measure, or how we can measure, Pan-African. So when the Pan-Africanists come together into a coalition, then we
Mm.
can put a standard where how we can measure and tick and say, oh, this person has scored maybe 70%. We believe that this one is a Pan-Africans. Maybe.
From the existing heads of states, out of your
Yes,
head, if you are asked who is Pan-Africanist from the current heads of states, is there one?
I think it's none. It's none really. I don't see any. To be honest, I don't see any on the continent.
We can say there are anti-imperialists, but not
Yeah,
quite.
maybe there is. Yeah, I think that's a correct word which you have used. There is anti-imperialists,
Mhm.
but by the very nature of Pan-Africanism, it is against imperialism, actually.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, but
And
at the
people
same
tend
time,
to take immediately when the leader is anti-imperialist to, like,
yes, that's the thing. That's the thing. But someone can be anti-imperialist, but then the person is not, Pan-Africanist. Like when you go back to the 1960s, President Olympio of Togo, Nkrumah reached out to him and told him that they should put Ghana and Togo together to form one country. Olympio was not a Pan-Africanist,
no.
but at the same time, he was anti-imperialist. He did not like imperialism. So he sort of wanted to create a small island on the African continent where he's the king and he will rule there. And the imperialism took him out. So you can see that this is very dangerous in itself. All right. So now for survival, for matters of survival on the continent, you see the heads of state now, a lot of them, they distance themselves from Pan-Africanism. All right. They want to look like they are neutral or something like that to survive, as heads of state, because there's those trappings which come with power, the luxury, the money, and all that. So, I mean, they want to be in power and stay there for as long as their term allows them, or as long as they are client, as long as they make their countries client states of imperialism. So, I mean, someone can be, as you said, anti-imperialist, but not necessarily a Pan-Africanist. So most of them, I think, some of them, as you see, like Kagame is anti-imperialist. Like he really doesn't like interference. He doesn't like being told what to do. And Museveni also, yeah, lately, yeah, Kagame doesn't like really being told what to do with the, within his country. Then Museveni of late is when he doesn't like it. But those olden days, like I said, you know, he followed everything. Every line which the the IMF and World Bank read, he was just following everything they told him. So he just reached somewhere, maybe around 2000, and he stopped. And when he stopped, actually, they wanted to remove him. That's when they were during that period when he stopped following them. They were sponsoring the opposition, hugely. They were giving the opposition a lot of money so that they can remove him. So that's why I say that today is these last years in power, they are some of his most productive periods because he has at least now acted uh, independently as a president. All right. So someone can be anti-imperialist. So is there any other anti-imperialist president in Zimbabwe? All right, Zimbabwe. Yeah. So some of them, I think that people like
Eritrea,
yeah,
Eritrea,
Eritrea is strongly,
full, yeah.
anti-imperialist. Eritrea is strongly anti-imperialist. I think that Ethiopia too. Ethiopia Abiy is very, very cunning. Is extremely cunning, and of course he showed that he wanted to walk in those shoes also. But I think there's fear. There's fear, and then balancing the needs of the country. So then this leads someone not to follow up with a lot of action, like to wage a crusade, like a real crusade, like the one which Nkrumah waged, and Gaddafi, like these were crusaders, really. They waged a war of unifying the continent. Like they wanted to unify it so bad that they followed it up with actions here and there, But for today, you definitely can say we have anti-imperialists, but Pan-Africanists, no, it's difficult to point. Like because
Yorubaland brought a good point. The AES. I think I'm trying. I'm starting to think like AES is out of the African Union on a different level. So that's why I did not
yeah,
mention.
definitely.
So what do you
And
think?
even I think the African Union has gone even slow on them. These expulsion things which they normally push around. But I think AES, yes, yes. If you talk about AES, I think that is where Pan Africanism is right now. Yes,
I don't
AES.
think they have taken the weight of Pan Africanism yet,
Yeah,
but
they
they
have
are
not yet. I
definitely
think maybe they are trying to
working there
consolidate.
and cutting the neo-colonialists, the
It's
imperialists.
possible that they want to consolidate, that they want to consolidate first,
There,
because you need to consolidate and have full control of the country and the institutions so that anyone who wants to oppose, you remove them, you eliminate them. I think that way maybe you can even start giving some support to other people who are struggling in the other countries. But like taking the whole weight of Pan-Africanism and responsibility, I think not yet, but I think they are demonstrating at least that there is hope. I think they demonstrate that the hope for Pan Africanism is not dead. At least that demonstration is there for now in the ES.
yeah. I think let's end it there. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for tuning in. Yeah, there's a lot of engagement. Very nice. In fact, we continued even after we are through with our discussion, seeing that what's going on in the chat section. But very exciting. This is really what keeps us moving. And go ahead and please share the video with others. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it so far. And I see a very, very little like compared to your number here. Thank you, Black, again, again and again, for reminding the people to share, like, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to help us further, you can also, support us is the right thing. You can donate to our PayPal account, and you have been doing so. Those of you, thank you very much. I see Greta Woodson, Patricia. I know some of you use a different name, but you are from here. But thank you all of you for for your support. And Yeah, please share the video. That will also help the YouTube algorithm. It's fighting us. It's slow. Some things we know that it's supposed to get a very good view, even from seeing here what we see from online, but it's going very slow. We know that they're trying to censor it, and I don't know what's going to wait for us, but for us until as far as it is there, we work and we make sure that we are here. That is the main thing. Thank you very much, Kwame, for being here again. Yeah, that's it. And we will see you on the next one. Bye bye.